First up is a new action thriller called Love Hurts, and it stars Huy Quan, Ariana DeBose, Daniel Wu, Sean Astin, Mustafa Shakir, Leo Tipton, Reese Darby, Andre Erickson, and Marshawn Lynch. And so just based on those names alone, I was excited for this film. I was excited that Huy Quan is getting to lead an action thriller. He stars as a character called Marvin Gable, who is a realtor in the suburbs, but who has a dark past. This is all in the trailers. I'm not giving anything away here. And then, that dark past comes back to haunt him, and it turns into an action thriller. So I was like, okay, cool. That's fine. I'm on board. 87 North is the production company behind it. So they are the folks behind things like John Wick, Atomic Blonde, Bullet Train, The Fall Guys. I was like, I know the action in this is going to be impeccable. And the action in this is impeccable. It's very creative. I was like, great. This is fine. This film should be a recipe for things I love because I'm rooting for folks in it, and I have to give a small disclaimer. I acknowledge this when I talk about animated films, is that usually I know a lot of folks involved, and so yeah, I do know some of the folks involved in this, and therefore I am rooting for them. Probably more than even a more broad audience is rooting for them, right? I'm like, I want this to succeed because I want to continue to get to see the Huy Quans of the world be in action blockbusters, etc. And I think Key does an amazing job in this film. I think most of the performances in this film are good. The biggest challenge is that a lot of the times they're in different films. And that does not a cohesive film make, unfortunately. And so it's more like getting to see a couple highlights of things strung together, and then the moments in between that don't work as well. And so unfortunately, as a byproduct of that, you aren't sustained through the entire thing. And I can't lie, and I have to be I have to warn you that as a cohesive viewing experience, it's not necessarily there. Now, if you want to turn your brain off and you just want to see a bunch of dope action, this is fine. This is going to be great. You're going to have a wonderful time. But I think because I was aware of the talent levels involved and because I'm rooting for them all, I think I might have expected a little bit more. I think the thing that stood out the most for me is Ariana DeBose's character. It's hard to, I don't want to knock it too much, but she says this in the production notes. She said she was channeling a Harley Quinn-esque character in terms of chaotic energy. I was like, yeah, that actually tracks. I read that bit after having seen the film. I was like, yes, this tracks. The problem with that is that nobody else in the film is in a Joker or a Batman movie. And so when you have one of your co-leads in a kind of renegade role, but it doesn't quite fit with the universe around it, it becomes really challenging. And then there's this Hong Kong martial arts thriller part happening. And that was my favorite part of it. There's this whole side stories, It's stories about love and relationships, both platonic and romantic, but the romantic ones were the ones that fell the shortest for me. The platonic ones were great. Also, I say this all the time. Give Marshawn Lynch more roles. Seeing him in Bottoms, seeing him in this, I'm like, yes, he can act within the scope of being Marshawn Lynch, but it's so joyous to watch him on screen. It's so joyous to watch Huy Quan on screen, So I'm just for those two, it could be worth seeing. But by the same token, being mindful of folks' time and money and all that stuff, I don't know if in good conscience I can be yes, run out and see this film. It is not the worst thing I have seen, and I'm not trying to impugn it in any way, but I'm just it did not live up to my expectations, and I said, my expectations might have been too high for it, but I also am inclined to be more generous towards it. So, all of that being said, I think it is also not the busiest weekend. And so if you really love going to the movies, which I love going to the movies, I see too many of them. But I think you could go to this. And if you are a fan of Key, it's so wonderful to see him up on the big screen like that. He brings such a warmth to the kind of pedestrian version of his character. And then you get to see him kick ass and you're like, damn, dude. You're in your 50s and you're that's him. That's actually him. For those reasons alone, I'm yeah, there's an element of worthiness here. It will probably also be out on streaming relatively soon, so I'm just going to caveat that. Can you tell I'm dancing around this a lot? Because I'm dancing around this a lot. But at the end of the day, I do have to put my objective hat on and say, while there are many scenes that I think were standout and fun and enjoyable, the entire film did not feel as cohesive as I would have liked. I think there are a lot of plot points that I feel may have ended up on the cutting room floor that would have actually maybe enhanced the story, and instead we leaned in on the things that they knew they could do well, like the action. But again, the action is really exciting. There are specific sequences in this I'm I will never look at certain things the same way again. All that being said, I'm going to give this a 2.7 out of 5. The next film I have is called Companion, and I missed reviewing this the prior week when it first came out because I just didn't get a chance to go to a screening, and so I finally saw it, and it takes a lot to drag me to a film that I don't get a chance to see in advance, so that should tell you how intrigued I was by Companion. And this is one where my expectations were not only met, but potentially exceeded. I don't know if I had the highest expectations for it, but people were saying really good things, and so I made a point to go see it, and I'm very glad I did. This is also, in many ways, a love story. It stars Sophie Thatcher and Jack Quaid. It's got Lucas Gage, Megan Suri, Harvey Guillen, and Rupert Friend. And I mean, I think they give a lot of it away in the trailers, but I had not seen the trailers or the longer trailers when I saw this. And so I'm very reticent to talk about plot points, or I know obviously I rarely talk about plot points, but it is hard to talk about the premise of the film without going into a little bit, but I'm going to try. So it is about a group of folks who are at a vacation cabin over a weekend, and then just chaos ensues. It's about the dynamics between this group of people. Sophie Thatcher and Jack Quaid play a couple. Harvey Guillen and Lucas Gage are a couple. Megan Suri and Rupert Friend are a couple. And then you get to see just absolute chaos and creativity happen. And the thing that I will say about this film, and if you know the conceit based on the trailers, like you will get what I'm referencing. And if you don't, then you'll hopefully still understand my meaning, is that this is a film where the core premise of it usually brings up a lot of questions for me and like the genre and all that stuff. And this film does such an excellent job, not only answering the questions every time they pop up for me, but actually coming up with a creative solution for it. And I love a film that can do that because, and I don't think this is a spoiler, like there is an element of subtle sci-fi to this, but it does such a good job of just creating this world that feels very realistic with these extra elements to it. The relationships between the characters, you know, the couple dynamics, all that stuff is so well done. And then the relationships between, you know, the platonic friends is so fun. And I'm like, I don't know if they all knew each other before, but you can tell that they're having a good time on set, and like that part was not hard for them. So yeah, I really appreciated this film. I think it is an excellent commentary on toxic masculinity and like the good guy syndrome and all of that type of stuff. So, you know, from that perspective, I really appreciated it. When I found out it was written and directed by a man, I was like, oh, I'm surprised there. But honestly, what an ally. And like, this is a great film. So again, I'm not going into too much detail because I just think it's worth enjoying for the sake of enjoying. The only thing I will, I guess, warn you about in some senses is that there is also a lot of action in this, and it is even more, I would say, potentially violent than something like Love Hurts. Like, Love Hurts has some gross stuff in it, but I feel like for the most part, it was relatively sanitized, except for one or two, like, key moments. This one just keeps escalating, and I'm like, oh man, okay, you know, if this means anything to you, it's from the folks who did Barbarian, which I did not see because I was warned in advance it would be too scary for me. So, Companion, really enjoyed it. Just creative, well thought out, you know, answered all my questions, which is really hard to do in the genre it's playing around in, and also just great performances. I'm going to give this a 4.8 out of 5. My last film this week is called Kinda Pregnant, and it is out streaming now on Netflix. It stars Amy Schumer, Jillian Bell, Will Forte, Damon Wayans Jr., Chris Gere, and a bunch of other comedians. And this one was tough. So, not to say that I'm not rooting for the folks in it, because I actually really like Jillian Bell, I like Amy Schumer, you know, but like I'm not rooting for this in the same way I'm super invested in something like A Love Hurts. And premise-wise, this one is a little bit strange. So Amy Schumer plays a character who has always wanted a family, and then her friend gets pregnant, and so this is, again, in the trailers and in the premise, she, at one point, is just, like, trying on a maternity bump and trying out, you know, just, like, waltzing around the world to see what it's like to be treated like a pregnant woman, she being Amy Schumer, the not pregnant one, and then runs into, to quote the tagline, the guy of her dreams, but while she is, you know, faking this pregnancy. And I have a lot of complicated thoughts on this one. So I will start with a compliment. I think this film actually has some really earnest and well-written and acted moments that explore the different relationships that women have with pregnancy and children and wanting to have children and whether or not they want to have children, right? Like, I think it actually does a really good job showcasing the spectrum that people can actually fall on. There's this one great monologue, not a huge spoiler, but there's one great monologue about how women don't talk to each other enough about the actual birth process, potentially because it would scare a lot of women off from procreating. But this is something I love about like Ali Wong's stand-up, right? Where she told people, steal those diapers. And that is something I never would have thought of because I have not given birth. But I'm like, the day, if I do, I will be like, give me those diapers because Ali Wong told me. And it was a legitimate piece of advice. I'm referring to the diapers for the mother, not the baby. Anyway, so I think this film actually has some really earnest, thoughtful moments between the female characters that talk about things like that. The problem is that it is all under this huge, weird asterisk of Amy Schumer's character extensively faking this pregnancy. And I know it's supposed to be for comedic effect, and she does play an earnestness to the character that like wants to have a baby, and you get it, like, you know, she has progressed X amount into her life and she does not have a kid yet, and that is really disappointing for her. And so I can understand that. It's just the level that they push it to becomes just not believable. And also it becomes a point of like, oh, this is now harmful to other people around you versus just, you know, keeping the experience to yourself. And I think that is where the film really kind of loses any traction it had. The other thing is like, and I am a fan of crude humor. Like, I like it, but it does not mesh well into this film. And I should note, Adam Sandler is a producer on this, and it's directed by a guy, and I feel like you can feel the moments where they're like, amp up this part of it. Because God forbid we let a comedy be too female-centric or focus on something that only, you know, a certain type of body can experience. And like all this, I don't know, you could tell the hard dichotomy of when there was interference and when there was vulnerability, and it does not work. It just, and again, because they push it so far, you kind of just end up losing any sympathy or empathy for Amy Schumer's character because she is continuing this charade to a point where it is affecting other people in a negative way. And so yeah, I mean, I ended up watching the whole thing because I very rarely will tap out of a film, but because it's on Netflix, I'm like, oh, the number of people are just going to tap out early. I really wish there's a film in here that I wanted to see. And it is the film that centers around the women in the different stages of life. Like, I don't think she needed to fake the pregnancy. I think we could have just had it be about her relationship with her pregnant friend and like the other pregnant people around her and all that stuff. Like, it's just, you don't need this shtick in order to make this work. But because they did that, it really doesn't work. So I really ended up not liking the majority of this film. The only reason I'm going to give it not a 0 effectively is because I thought the conversations that were actually genuine and felt like things that I don't get to see on screen enough were well done. And so for that reason, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5. And I know that's not a high rating. I wish I could give it a higher rating. Instead, I'm going to recommend you watch Babes with Michelle Buteau and Ilana Glazer, because I think that has a lot of the similar elements that I really gravitated towards in this, but it's not upsetting in a disconcerting way.